Hello and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast where you'll hear from extraordinary, trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstiss, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the founder of Fearless Women, a company with a powerful ambition to drive positive change for women's sport. A huge thank you to Sport England, who have supported this series of The Game Changers and do so much to tackle the inequalities women face across all areas of sport. From the wonderful This Girl Can campaign and initiatives that help shape school sport for girls, to schemes that encourage more female volunteers in the workforce, support female coaches and officials, and ensure that more women from all backgrounds take leadership positions on the boards of our sports organisations. My guest today is Judy Murray OBE, a former international tennis player, Fed Cup captain and coach to many champions, including her sons Jamie and Andy. I'd heard that Judy had been a great tennis player herself, so I asked her how she got started.
Well, I think that's very, very kind of you to say that I was a very good tennis player, because I think I was pretty decent at best, because I won a lot of Scottish national titles at junior level and senior level. That can sound really good, but the reality was there were very few women playing competitive tennis in my day, so you kind of played the same people in every single tournament. But as my dad used to say, you can only beat who's put in front of you. But I was very aware that the pool of competitive women to play against, but also to hit with, they just weren't there. But I think that I got to a level in tennis that was pretty good, considering the background, given that, tennis was very much a summer sport only when I was young, and I played badminton in the winter. I became quite a good badminton player. I played for Scotland juniors at badminton, and I was the British Universities champion at badminton. But the reality of that was just that there were no covered courts in Scotland, and we have terrible weather. So you could only play tennis probably 5 or 6 months of the year. So you found something else to do in the winter. But I got into tennis through my parents. They both played at our local club, and they both played for the North of Scotland county. So they played pretty well. And they got me started when I was big enough to wield a wooden racket. In those days, the court was huge, and the balls were white, and the rackets were wooden and quite heavy. So you probably had to be about 10 or 11 before you could get into it, where nowadays kids can get into it 4 or 5 with the mini rackets and the sponge balls and the wee courts and so forth. So that's how I got started.
And you had a sporty family, you mentioned there. So both your parents played tennis as well, and your dad played football, I believe.
Yeah, my parents both played tennis and badminton to quite a good level. They played for a kind of regional level at both of those. And my dad was a footballer in the days where you had a full-time job and played football as well. So in the sort of late 40s, early 50s, he played for a number of Scottish clubs, including Hibs, which was the biggest club that he played for. But I don't remember any of that because it was all before I was born. But definitely the sporty genes come through, I think, both sides of the family, and the competitive genes, the kind of never say die and I hate losing attitude, definitely.
Excellent. And you sort of put a toe in the water of playing professionally. I mean, you've talked down your playing, but you were ranked very highly in terms of British girls as you were growing up. So what happened there with that pathway?
Well, I grew up in an era where you didn't have coaching and squads and accompanied trips to events and things like that. You pretty much had to do everything yourself and learn for yourself. So I learned to play the game by playing the game at the club with, firstly, my parents, and then the other kids. And when I got good enough, I was allowed to play with the adults. And it was really the adults at the club that taught you how to play the game, doubles mainly. And then, as you went into the wider district and county, you learned to play with the better players. And that was really how I learned. And it's actually also what's formed most of my coaching philosophy. The whole thing is, the sport is about competing. It's about playing the game. It's not about going to endless coaching or activity sessions. There has to be lots of competitive opportunities. So again, with that lack of infrastructure and that kind of backdrop, I probably got to a pretty good level. And when I was in my last year of juniors, I was ranked 8 in Britain. And the top 6 girls were given an opportunity to join a squad that was based at Queen's Club in London, which of course was everything paid for, everything covered, the training, the trips to tournaments, the, I suppose, fitness and so forth, although that wasn't such a big thing in those days. So I kind of just missed out. And it was the difference between having the opportunity to get everything that I kind of dreamed of, somewhere that you could train on a daily basis, other girls to train with, opportunity to travel and compete overseas, etc. And just that kind of being too out of it. And of course, being too out of it and being stuck in Scotland where we had zero infrastructure meant the difference between everything and absolutely nothing. So I think I became very aware at that stage of the importance of creating opportunities for everybody, and that that picking the top 6 on ranking for me was like, well, what happens to the rest of us? We're so close, and who's to say you pick the right ones? Everybody comes from a different background. We don't all develop physically or emotionally. We don't all mature at the same times, blah, blah, blah. So I think that I became very aware of wow. And I took off on my own. I'd passed my school exams that gave me a university place, and I'd done this deal with my dad that if I got my exams that I could take a year off to play tennis to see how good I could become. And I managed to do that. But the reality of that was, my dad ran his own business. My mum had my 2 brothers at home. I really had to go on my own. And in those days, which was kind of 1997, 8, you were really disconnected. There were very few flights. There weren't mobile phones. There weren't ATM machines. There was no internet. So you made phone calls home from a phone box where you reverse the charges on international through an international operator. You picked up money from the post office in whatever city you were playing at. It was wired through. It was a very, very different world. And so it's quite scary to be out there on your own as a teenager, trying to find your way across Europe, enter yourself in the competitions, find your lodgings, get your transport to and from. And you're kind of pretty living hand to mouth of, I need to win a couple of rounds this week to be able to afford to get up. So I think I've learned a lot about life and survival, independence, responsibility, accountancy, I suppose. You learned as you went along in the same way that I learned to play the game by playing the game. You learned by doing it, and it's a very, very different world now. There's much more laid on things. There's much more spoon feeding. I mean, I wouldn't change it for anything, but I didn't last very long. Where it came to a head was when I had my bag kind of broken into, I suppose, on a packed bus in Barcelona. I'd gone down to the Coast restaurant to pick up money that my parents had wired to me. I was on my own, and I was aware that the bus was really busy. It was crowded. People were jostling. And when I got off, I realised that my bag had been opened. And when I looked inside, my wallet had gone. And I remember this so clearly, like looking in my bag and then realising it wasn't there, sitting on the pavement. And I kept shutting it and opening it and shutting it and opening it and hoping that one of the times it would be there. And when I realised that it wasn't there, I thought, right, I need to solve this, and I've always liked a challenge. I never panic when something goes really wrong. I almost see it as a, right, click into gear. What do I have to do now? And that's because I always had to think for myself. Whereas nowadays, kids would get out a gadget and say, where's the nearest police station? And then they go on Google Map and they'd find it. So I had to find a policeman. Then I had to find another one who could speak English. And I went to the police station. They connected me with the embassy. And, I managed to sort it because my passport was in my wallet. It was just one of those kind of nightmare situations. Phoned my parents and let them know what had happened. And my dad said, look, just come home. That it's too dangerous. It's too much. And for them, I didn't realise this at the time, but I would realise it now as a parent. For them, I'm in a European country. I'm in a massive city, Barcelona. They can't connect with me. And suddenly I've got no money, no passport. And, they just wanted me to be home. So I got home and my dad said, look, it's too dangerous. We're just not allowing it. And I think in some ways I was quite relieved that they made the decision, that it wasn't me that was sort of saying, I can't do this. It's too tough or whatever. From there, I had about 6 months before I could start university, and my dad got me enrolled did my first coaching qualification, and that was over a kind of a number of weekends. And he also enrolled me in a crash course of shorthand and typing. And I actually loved it because it was so intense. And it has been, without question, one of the best things I've ever done, because taking notes at uni, writing, when I'm watching or in a press conference or if I'm watching somebody playing and I'm making notes and I don't want anybody to know what I'm writing, shorthand's been really useful. Of course, typing is now just everybody does it now. But I do think a lot of, always saying this, we're all products of our environment. But I do think that experience that I had of really wanting that opportunity and wanting to see how good I could be and having a go at it, which really wasn't there because of where I lived, because of lack of infrastructure. I do think that further down the line, that really formed me a lot to, when I did actually get into tennis coaching, to creating opportunities for the Scottish kids. And, eventually I went on to become the national coach, which I never would have imagined I would do. And, created opportunities not just for players, but for coaches to improve to a level where they could travel and so forth. So, yeah, we're all formed by our experiences, good and bad.
And you talked about that early time of coaching, sort of pre-university. Was that an option for you to do more and continue more down the coaching route at that time?
I did the course. It was called the Elementary Coach Award. I managed to pass it, and I did it as a means of being able to earn some pocket money when I was at university, something that I could do either in the evenings or on the weekends to earn some money as a student. And I got a coaching gig up at Craiglockhart Tennis Centre in Edinburgh. So I must have been about 18. And I went up it was a Saturday morning thing, and I was given these 8 kids. And luckily there were coaches on the other courts as well doing similar things. There were loads of children there. And I suddenly realised that even though I played to a good level, I'd passed this elementary coaching award, I had actually no idea how to talk to these kids or to organise them, because the coaching award had never covered that. It was all about here's what to do and a bit of why to do. But there was nothing about how to be or how to do, which of course is crucial, because, the whole thing with coaching is face-to-face communication, interaction, being the Pied Piper, being lively. I always say being fair, firm and fun. And I know that now. But at the time, I just I don't know how to talk to these kids. And I looked across onto the next court and I saw what the other coaches were doing. And I literally just kind of copied what they were doing the whole time. But I didn't enjoy it because I didn't feel comfortable. And I completed the 6 weeks of it and I never did it again. And again, that experience has formed me to so much of what I do now, which is building workforces. And everything that we do is about what to do, why to do, how to do, and how to be. But the way that we do it is, if we do 3-hour workshops, we do 2 hours with the candidates where we show them all the content. We explain why we use this content, what skills it develops that you need for tennis. And then we do an hour where we bring in a class of kids or adults and we show them a class in action, and we show them how we organize it, whether it's big numbers in a small space, whatever it is, so they can see, because it's that whole thing. If you can see it, you can be it. So at that early qualification, I never used it.
You were still playing tennis, or tennis was still part of your life when you had the boys? So kind of jumping forward through university and...
Yeah, I did. I played tennis right through university. I went to the World Student Games, played for Great Britain in the World Student Games, which was a wonderful experience. Then when I started working, I played for a club in Glasgow. And when we moved through to Dunblane, and that was really when, I went back over to the tennis club that I'd been a member of since I was young, and discovered that there were still no coaching there, nothing, there were kids playing, but there was nothing organised for them, no junior teams, etc., etc. So I started to volunteer just a couple of hours a week, playing with some of the older teenagers, and showed them how to play the game. And as kind of word spread, more parents asked me if their kids could join in, if I could do anything for the younger ones, etc., etc. And I said, well, I was doing it voluntarily, and I couldn't afford to pay for childcare because I'd had to give up my job, and my car went with my job, and I was really feeling quite trapped in my house was walkable from the tennis courts, thankfully. But I basically said, your kids can join in if you can look after Andy and Jamie in the clubhouse. So our clubhouse became full of toys and things, and there was a park beside it and a duck pond and all the rest of it. So that was kind of how it started. What I discovered was that I actually loved sharing my sport just as much as I loved playing it. And I got really involved and, over time grew a mum's army in the club. I got all the mums involved to run the cafe, help me run competitions, the club teams and so forth, because you can't do it all yourself. I knew what needed to be done, but I kind of basically brought all the mums in and said, right, okay, and who wants things to happen more for their kids than the parents? So that made total sense to me as well. We had a wonderfully thriving club over the years, which was a whole lot of fun. But Jamie and Andy, obviously, as very young children, grew up in a wonderful community club environment where all the older kids would play everything with them, from football to table tennis to water bomb fights to tennis itself, of course, and the golf club was next door. I mean, it was a brilliant environment for kids to grow up in.
And you transitioned then on from there. So you became, I believe, were you the first woman to pass the LTA's Performance Coach Award in the 90s?
I was. Yeah, so what happened was that as the kids at the club were getting better and better, and some of them were getting to a level where they were playing at sort of Scottish national level, and I realised how much the game had changed since I learned to play it. There was double-handed backhands, there was topspin serves, there was weird grips like what Rafa uses, the Western grips and so forth, and I'd learned very traditional wooden racket, step in, swing over your shoulder, follow through, kind of stuff, and it wasn't working and I was thinking, oh gosh, I need to do another qualification. So I did the second qualification, which was called the Intermediate Coach Award. That was a 1-week course, and I found the same thing. I found that it didn't give me what I wanted. I wanted to see how people coached good kids on a daily basis. I really had to learn everything for myself in terms of coaching, because there were no role models in my area, and nobody. Because tennis in Scotland was such a minority sport, nobody aspired to be a great player or a great coach because the infrastructure just wasn't there to support it. So, I went off with this what to do and why to do, and kind of experimented a lot with a lot of things myself. So I really kind of, for the most part, formed my own how to coach philosophy, but was very aware of the how to be, how you make kids feel good about themselves. And I think through all my years of being involved in Scottish squads once in a blue moon for juniors, was very aware that the coach who was in charge, who was part-time, was not interested in the girls. So we were always shoved off to the end court. I was very aware of that whole thing of making everybody feel the same, that you don't have favourites, that you're interested in everybody. So I did this Intermediate Coach Award, and same thing, about a year later, I went to the lady who ran Coach Education and I said, look, I really want to learn. Some of my kids are getting really good and I've got nobody to learn from, and is there anything else I can do? And I'd started by that stage to go to an occasional workshop from other sports to try to learn. So it was difficult when you've got young kids to actually find these things and get to them. Anyway, she said she was working on a new course that was going to last for a year called the Performance Coach Awards, and to wait for that, she thought that would be really good. So I applied for a place on it when it came up. There were 20 spaces and I got one, and I was surprised that I got one, given that I was more or less still a part-time volunteer coach and I was stuck up in Scotland and so forth. Anyway, I took it up. It was quite daunting because all of the courses were down south, which meant a lot of travelling, a lot more extra expense. And my kids were young, maybe sort of 7 and 8, 6 and 7 at that stage. And I was aware it was a whole year of workshops to go to. So I did it. And when I got down to the first one, I discovered that there was 18 men and 2 women on it. And a considerable number of the men on the course were very high-level players. Everybody except me was working full-time at a big club down south. And we didn't have big clubs, and we certainly didn't have jobs in tennis. Everybody had to be self-employed, and there were hardly any coaches in Scotland. Such was the lack of infrastructure. So I felt very daunted by it, very intimidated, and thinking, on that first workshop that I'd made a mistake going down, and I had a bad experience with one of the tutors who told me that I was very lucky to have a place on the course, that they'd had to turn a lot of guys away. And I really looked at him, I go back to what I said before about making people feel good or bad about themselves. And I thought, why are you telling me this? And then he said that they'd even had a complaint from somebody who had been turned away from the course or who hadn't got place. And that this person had said, what could I possibly offer to performance coaching when I had 2 young kids? And I just, anyway, I went off and I just said, really, and then I went off and I kind of sat on my own for a bit, and I just thought, right, I just went into what I call fuck you mode. And I thought, I'm here now, I'm gonna do it. And I really had to develop a thick skin because I hated it those first few. Then like within any group, you find a couple of people who are quite like-minded in terms of the way you think or the things that you talk about or laugh about and whatever. And that made it a whole lot better. But again, that's made me very aware of how tough it is to be a woman in a man's world, and how much difficult it is to be in very much the minority in a situation like that. You don't want anybody to ask you to demonstrate. You don't want to ask a question. You don't want to answer a question in case you look stupid. And so that formed me further down the line in growing the She Rallies program and the Misfits program, which are all female, because you bring a whole group of like-minded women together. You get a completely different atmosphere, relaxed, comfortable, supportive. But you need to do something about these things. You need to speak up. You need to stand up, and you need to have solutions to it. I think I've always tried to do that, is when I've seen something that's wrong or unfair or whatever, I've tried to create a solution for it and create a program to help to cover it, rather than, I think it's quite easy to be negative and blame and whatever. And I've always tried not to go down that route. It's more like, here's how it is, and here's what I think we can do. And the other thing that I've learned is, don't wait for somebody else to do it. Get off your butt and do it yourself.
And how long was it after that award that you became the Scottish national coach?
Well, I passed that in 1994 or 5, and literally just as I'd finished doing it, the Scottish national coach job was advertised, and I think it had been vacant for about 18 months. I think they'd had 1 or 2 people come for short periods of time, but if they'd come in from outside of the country, they would soon find out no infrastructure, no covered courts, no aspirations. It never lasted very long. And I was persuaded to apply for it. And I think if I hadn't been persuaded to apply, I don't think I would have. I think it would have, I felt like it's a step too far. I've got young kids. What business do I have being the Scottish national coach? I don't have the experience. And the lady who persuaded me to go for it was at the time the secretary of the Scottish Scotland Tennis Association. Now you'd call that a chief exec, but at the time it was called secretary. And she said to me, you know the infrastructure, you know all the people, you know all the challenges, you've got the passion, and now you've got this qualification. Why wouldn't you use it? And I went off and thought about it, and I thought, why wouldn't I? So I went for it, and there was a couple of foreigners, one from Poland, one from Australia, that were also interviewed. I was still at that sort of, oh, he's from Poland or he's from Australia. They've got top players and Grand Slams and major events in their countries. We don't have anything. But anyway, they went with me, and I spent the best part of 10 years trying to build an infrastructure and build a team of coaches and build a pool of players. And actually, when I look back, I'm starting from scratch on my own, no staff, literally a bucket of balls and a block booking at some indoor courts that were at Stirling University, which were the only indoor courts, and they just opened in 1994. We didn't have anything else. And that was really how I started. And can't say I knew exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I had to start small and I had to start young to form the youngest ones, that was going to be the pool. And I started with 20 kids aged between 8 and 11, and they came in at first just during the weekends, and then some of them who would come in during the weeks. And we sort of built up from there. But of those 20 kids, we got 4 Davis Cup players and 1 Fed Cup player in Elena Baltasha, who was world top 50 eventually, and Andy Jamie with their slams and Davis Cups and world number ones. Jamie Baker played Davis Cup, and Colin Fleming, gold medal at Commonwealth Games, mixed doubles, and made top 30, I think, ATP doubles. So, and we got coaches out of that as well. Leon Smith, who's the Davis Cup captain and head of men's tennis, very successful coach. He started with me when he was 20. I took him on as an apprentice, couldn't afford to pay him, but he came in. I said, I can give you the experience and all the rest of it. And eventually I was able to pay him because we built things up. But yeah, he started with me, and he was just dropped out of college and said he wanted to be a tennis coach, and he wanted to learn, and he's had a great career out of it. So really, out of my little cottage industry that started with just me and actually the parents, I brought the parents in, and that's the same as I did with the club. And I said, here's what I want to do, but there's just me, and my budget was £90,000 for the whole country to pay for everything, other coaches, court, competitions, training squad, talent ID, coach conference, everything. I did everything with 90 grand. So the parents were my first port of call again, and they were brilliant with job sharing and putting kids up overnight so they could come into that one centre on the weekends. And But I think that, a lot of that, what you brought together, I think being a female and being a mum, you learn to multitask, you learn to organise, you learn to involve other people. You understand that you can't do everything by yourself and that you need a team around you. So the parents were my first team, and then in time I built my little team of coaches as well. So yeah, I think we did okay for a little cottage industry.
That's fine. I really, really enjoyed your autobiography, Knowing the Score. A big recommendation to anybody listening to read that. And it gives a fascinating insight into your backstory. Does it really frustrate you that for so long you were just viewed by many people as this kind of pushy mum?
Yeah, it really, and still annoys me, because still some people, assume that's what I was, and others who say, oh, it was all right for Jamie and Andy, their mum was a tennis coach. And I go, I wasn't a tennis coach. I learned to be a tennis coach so that I could help them and others before them, because they were just little. But I've always kind of railed against that, because for me everything was about fun and opportunity and learning and trying to improve and being supportive. And of course, in an individual sport, the onus is very much on the parents to make things happen for the kids. And when you're a kid, somebody needs to open the door for you, whatever it is that you do. And that is the job of the parents. We create the environment in which hopefully they can thrive. But I think that the British media, they kind of painted me as that pretty much from that first Wimbledon, where I was pumping my fist in the player box, which is possibly quite unusual for a mother of sons, doing that. And I think what many people failed to realise was, I've been there supporting them when nobody was watching them ever, all the way through, just because you do. And always would get excited and positive and whatever, because you're the only person that's watching. So if they need a bit of encouragement or a bit of energy to feed off, or a bit of extra support if things aren't going well, they're always going to look your way. So I was doing nothing different to what I would normally do. I probably was extra excited because it was Wimbledon. I couldn't believe my son was playing at Wimbledon that first year. And the nature of tennis is such that if you have 90 seconds at changeovers and at the end of a set, and Wimbledon, being on BBC, has no ad breaks, the cameras, the commentators, everybody goes to the player boxes or the crowds, to have something to talk about. And so I found myself being talked about, and there was just this assumption that I was over competitive, I was therefore pushy. And the pictures that were all used in the papers of me during that first Wimbledon were always baring my teeth or pumping my fist. And if I had been a dad doing that, I don't think anybody would have made anything of it, because it's okay to be a driven, ambitious man. Clearly, for many people, it was something wrong with being competitive women. And I do think that the dynamic of mother of sons in sport is less usual. But if my kids had been rugby players or footballers or cricketers or even golfers, nobody would have known that I existed. It's just the nature of tennis is such that you're in the player box, the cameras go to you because of the gaps in play. So I didn't ask for it, and I didn't like it. I would read everything, and I wanted to know what people were saying, but I had to do the common sense thing and put the blinkers on. And this is written by people who don't know you. They don't know the backstory. So to go back to the book, so it was when I did the book and when I did the book tour, I did quite an extensive book tour with it, which my publishers put together. And I actually found I really, really enjoyed it. The whole talking, you always do it with somebody else, like we're doing now, somebody asking you questions about it. And then it sounds more like a conversation. But I think it really helped me to share the backstory of everything that we had gone through as a family to get to where the boys had got to. I did the book tour in 2017, which was the year after they had both ended up as world number ones, end of year world number ones, one in singles and one in doubles, which was great for family harmony that they both did it in the same year. And it just so happened that my book was finished just when they did that. It was incredible timing. So when I did the book tour, it really helped me a lot to feel like I was telling people, here's actually how it all happened. And I think the other thing that perhaps changed people's perceptions, I mean, and I could understand why if members of the public would see me at, and the only pictures they would see of me were me pumping my fist or baring my teeth or whatever, or they saw me in the player box, I could understand why they would think that that's what I was like. I could understand it. But I think that when I did Strictly, for example, I think so many people saw me in a completely different light, show your, how you are, and you're willing to put yourself out your comfort zone. You're prepared to do something that you're rubbish at in front of a live audience, and you're loving it. And I think that changed a lot of people's perception of me as well. But I do try hard now to use my voice where I can to be supportive of female coaches, women in sport, etc., because I think it was in the Olympics in 2012, and you wouldn't have got me to stand up in front of people and speak for love nor money. And I went along to listen to somebody else talking at a female-only conference that was part of 2012. And this woman she was Scottish, and she wasn't involved in sport in any way at all, but her name was Caroline McHugh, and she talked about, the power of being you, not trying to be something that you thought other people expected you to be, or say what you thought that there's only one you, and you must be the best version of you that you can be. And afterwards, I stayed behind to speak to her, and she said, "Oh, Judy Hen," because she was Scottish, "how lovely to see you." And I had no clue that she would know who I was. I was blown away by it because she made me goosebumps up my back listening to her talking. I was so taken with her. Anyway, huge tennis fan. She invited me to tea at her house, when I was next in London. It was the strangest thing. But from this one woman gave me the confidence to speak up. And the first conference that I put together when I did the LTA She Rallies program, which is a female workforce bill, I asked her if she would come and close the conference and do a similar kind of talk. And she came all the way up from London. She did it as a favour for me, because I think, and I'm like this as well, if a woman asks me to do something, 99 times out of 100, I will do it if I can, because it's a woman that's asked me, and I know how much harder it is to make things happen as a woman and for women in sport. And she did that for me in the same way that I would have done that for her if she had asked me to do it. But she just blew me away with this. She really made me feel like, yeah, I've got something to offer. I can speak out. And I think for all those years where I was painted as the pushy mum and all the rest of it, I didn't do the media. I didn't speak out because I just didn't. I just got on with it. But actually, once Andy won Wimbledon, I really felt like I could speak out. And all these things happened around the same time. I got offered the Fed Cup captaincy at the end of 2011. Everything happened around that kind of 2-year period. Stepping out of your comfort zone and speaking up in front of people is incredibly daunting for anybody. And I hated it the first few times that I did it. And I kind of analysed what I did. And I wrote down things that when I watched people who were good at public speaking, or that I enjoyed speaking to, what did I like about it? How did they put things together? My terror was always that I would forget what I was going to say, but you make yourself do it. I made myself do 3 conferences a year, tennis conferences a year, because in all the years that I was trying to learn from going to overseas workshops and overseas conferences, I never once listened to a female coach. It was always guys. And when I did my first one in Mexico, and I really wasn't very good, I was bang average at best, and there was 1,000 people there. And of the people who stayed behind to speak to me afterwards, the majority of them were women, and they were all saying the same thing. Thank you so much for being a woman and standing up and doing that. And I thought, you know what? Women need to listen to women. They need to hear our own experiences. And so from that moment, I committed to do it. I thought, I'm going to do 3 a year until I get quite good at this. And now I've got quite good at it, and you can't shut me up.
I've loved hearing you. I think the Women's Sport Conference and the Women's Sport Trust Conference, and I've loved listening to you and hearing your story too. So I'm going to take you back, if I can, just to Strictly for a moment. And from where you'd come from, was that a very tough decision to put yourself out there and agree to take part in it?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I think that I loved Strictly from when it started, loved it. And when it first started, it was about 8 dancers who'd never danced before, and they were completely starting from scratch. And I loved watching that learning journey, learning a new skill, performing it in front of a live audience, all that kind of stuff. I loved it. So I've always enjoyed it. And when they asked me if I'd like to do it, I couldn't believe that they'd asked me. I was really, really pumped to do it. But I don't think at that point I really considered how terrifying it might be to actually do it on a Saturday night. You do a sort of a dummy run with a dancer they're testing you out, you're testing them out, because you might not like it. So that was fun. I did that with Robin Windsor at Pineapple Studios, loved it. And then they said, right, we'd love you to do it if you'd like to do it. And I was like, I had to run it past the boys. And of course, you may have heard me tell the story before. It was quite funny because the boys are quite different from each other. And I went to Jamie first because he's always the easier option. He goes, oh, Mum, you love Strictly. You should do it. You'll have great fun, blah, blah, blah. And then I said to Andy, and he kind of stared at me for about a full 5 seconds or so. And then he went, oh, my God, you'll be rubbish. And, it was funny because they were both right. I loved it and I was rubbish. And I didn't care that I was rubbish because for all that I am competitive, I wasn't competitive in that because I knew it wasn't my thing. And I just wanted to enjoy the experience of it. And I did love the experience of it and had the most wonderful partner in Anton Dubet. We got on like a house on fire, became great friends, still are great friends. He had a wonderful way of teaching with humour, which is very much how I work as well, that you can get your points across with humour, which means that people never feel bad about that they can't do it. You're not saying, no, not like that. Like, it would just be like, it was something I did with my arm, waving my arm across my body. And it was part of this waltz. And I said, is that it? And he said, no, you look like you're swatting a fly. You've gone far too fast. But it just was great. So anyway, it was really good fun. Absolutely terrifying on Saturday night when you have to do it live. Terrified that you'll forget everything, that your mind will just go blank. Terrified that I would trip because I hate heels, so that the heels were a real challenge for me. Always wear flat shoes. Not an entertainer, don't have any kind of rhythm and timing, couldn't read the music. Everything was a massive challenge, much more than I imagined that it would be. But the fun of it and the learning experience, the life experience, I would not swap that for anything. And every week that you survived, you got a bit stronger and a bit more confident. I'm not saying I got any better at dancing, but you definitely get more confident and you get more comfortable with the surroundings and so forth. But it was just the most wonderful experience. But if you never dip your toe in the water, how do you know how far you can go with anything? And when I talk about things like that to women, I'm talking about this being brave, being confident, taking the first step. I'm talking about having supportive people around you, the other female dancers who would help me with the female side of the steps if I asked them to. There's so many life lessons that I learned from that, and so many things that can transfer into other things that I do, and everybody's interested in that. But I do think, for me, it made a lot more people interested in what I do in the tennis world because they'd seen me in a completely different set of circumstances on a TV show.
Excellent. Tennis obviously is one of the sports where I think we see women have more semblance of equality in terms of prize money and media opportunities. But do you feel it's still quite a male-dominated sport?
I think that it definitely is ahead of most other sports in terms of the opportunities for prize money and endorsements and profile, because the major events are well televised and well publicised and always have been, because the majors have always been men and women at the same venue, and the audience watching tennis is pretty much 50-50 men and women. So we're ahead of the game in lots of ways at the top end of the game. I still think as you go down the lower or earlier levels, I'm not sure quite what the right word is there, of the game, I don't think it's the same. I think we're still way behind in terms of number of female coaches, number of female decision makers, number of women on boards and so forth. Really, for the female side of the game to be influenced and promoted and progressed in a fair way, you need much better representation among those who are making the decisions. So I speak about that quite a lot, and I talk about the importance of having a pathway for women within sport. And I don't just mean in coaching, I mean in everything, so that you can see what's the next stage. If you want to progress and you are competent enough and confident enough to progress, that there is a pathway for you. And I would say that probably all sports don't have a female pathway, and I suppose I experience it more on the coaching side, so therefore it doesn't surprise me that most of the higher positions within tennis are still occupied by men, even on the women's side of the game. Our head of women's tennis, head of coach education, head of performance coach education, they're all men in those positions. And I've always argued since I started speaking out that every sport should have a female focused development strand in its strategy that is led by women, because women see things on behalf of other women. They see them with their eyes, they hear them with their ears, they understand their bodies, their psyche, etc., in a way that men won't. Why should they? They have never been women. So, yeah, I will continue to speak out about that. But unless you have equality of opportunity all the way through, you won't get those women coming onto boards and vying for those positions. We've got to prepare them for that. So you need to talent identify, I think, in the way that you identify players, and you need to create the pathway that sets them on that road, so that eventually we have got, because women would want to be there because they are good enough to be there, because they, and to get good enough to be there, you need to have gone through all the stages and amassed the knowledge, the experience, they're working alongside people who have been great at what they do, which of course is the easiest way to get good at something. So equality of opportunity, I think, still has some way to go.
We've heard a lot recently, haven't we, in terms of mistreatment of young female and male athletes, in terms of gymnastics and swimming and athletics. And in that era of Me Too, do you think there is more that will come out in that tennis world historically, in terms of that dominance of male coaching and infrastructure?
Well, I think there are very few female coaches on the women's tour. It's dominated by male coaches. And of course the men's tour is as well. You'll find an occasional woman, usually it's a wife or a mother sometimes, but it's very, very rare. The tennis circuit is pretty much 11 months of the year. It's tough to be on the road for that amount of time, whether you're a male coach or a female coach. But, traditionally, if women want to have families, it's very, very tough to travel and leave your child at home, or to take your child with you is almost impossible. It's also very expensive to, in an individual sport, you're responsible for all your own costs. So you have to pay your coach's expenses, your fitness trainer, if you're able to afford them. Very few are able to afford the entourage, but the ones at the top of the game can. So if you're a player on the middle level, or even getting close to maybe top 30 or so, you probably haven't got the luxury financially of being able to pay for a physio, a fitness trainer and a coach on the road. All those fees, all those expenses, travel, accommodation, food, phones, etc. So often the choice of coach comes down to somebody who can also operate as a hitting partner and perhaps do some of the fitness training as well. And as a hitting partner, you're far more likely to find guys who have been at a reasonable level that is closer to women at a good level. And I think that goes against female coaches on the road as well, that, if they can't, if you ask me to go on the road with a female player, there is no chance I'd be able to hit with them. I could feed balls to them out of the basket, of course I could, and put pressure on that way, but I couldn't hit. So therefore you need to find somebody else. So I think that is another side of it, the cost factor, the hitting ability. But I think there are ways around that. I do think the WTA Tour could provide a list of hitting partners at every venue that they're at. They could create that of local players, male or female, and you just draw from that. So if I was the coach and I couldn't hit and I look for a hitting partner, I go to the list, and that could be provided in the same way as the physio rota or the lifestyle rota. It is a service that is provided. And I think that might encourage more women to take on female coaches as well. But you've got to give them the opportunity to get there. And so often I hear coaches who want to climb the ladder, they just get stuck. They get stuck because there's so many guys to be chosen from, and whoever is doing the choosing is also a guy and doesn't create the opportunity. You do hear that a lot. I'd love to find the start of a solution that would lead to more women at the top end of the game.
Are you hopeful for the future that things might change?
Well, I think, there's definitely been a big groundswell around women in sport. There's all the Me Too movements. I think there is a groundswell. It's a pity that COVID has kind of stuttered everything.
A little bit, yeah.
But I think that the key to it is that we have to collectively be prepared to stand up, speak up, show up, and continue to do it. Not just do it once and go, oh, that's it, I've done my bit. We have to be there for the long haul, because although we've made progress, we have to keep our foot on the gas so that we get it closer to, making a little bit of progress is good, but it's not enough. If the gap is very big and you make an incremental move forward, you've still got a long way to go. And the only way to do it is to band together and to be collectively strong together. But we have to be prepared to use our voices. We have to be prepared to be shouted down, develop a thick skin, and so forth.
I love that Andy's been so celebrated as a feminist for calling out what other people might have chosen to ignore in the sport. Has that surprised you, or is what you would have expected of your son?
Well, I think it's been great because he has done it consistently. He hasn't just pitched up with one comment and then said, that's my bit, I'm done. He regularly does it, which is great, and it makes such a big impact when he does, or when a man speaks out on behalf of the women. It makes much more impact than when one of the top women does it. Sadly, that is just the case. So I'm really glad that he does it. I think he's always been, like everyone in our family, we kind of really rail against unfairness of any kind. And I think he's always been aware of how difficult it was for me working in a man's world, how little opportunity or little encouragement, and how hard it is to open doors and so forth, or get people to listen to you, in the early days, not so much now. But I think where his eyes were really opened were when he took on Amelie Mauresmo as his coach, and the amount of criticism that he got for that, which he just didn't understand it at all. That, she had the expertise, she'd been a former world number one Grand Slam champion, she had the skill set, great people skills. And, for him, it was nothing to do with gender. It was, I really like being with her. I like what she has to offer. We're a good fit. And he also wanted somebody who could listen to him. He was at an age and a stage where he wanted to have more, or to take more direction on which way he was going. And he wanted to be able to talk with somebody about it. And you do get a lot of male coaches who don't listen. It's I'm telling you what to do, whatever. I think especially when you're younger, quite easy to be kind of dictated to, and I think listening skills are something that women do particularly well. But he, that partnership came in for a lot of criticism, and I think he was aware from a very early stage that if he didn't do as well or better than he had been doing before, she was going to get it in the net. He speaks about that a lot, and I think it is, to be a woman in a position of excellence or at the top of something, you have to be absolutely brilliant at what you do, because you are so easily knocked down. And it's not always the same with guys. We're much more easily judged on how we look, what we wear, than guys are, and I think that's something else that I learned, and probably relates a bit to Strictly. Prior to that, I didn't have any interest in clothes. I was hoodie and jeans or my tracksuit and so forth. And then I realised that when you put yourself up in front of loads of people, the first thing that most of them do is judge you on how you look and what you're wearing and so forth. I think, with Andy, he takes his role in his sport. He gives back a lot to his sport. He gives very informed opinions on things. And I think because he has consistently batted on the women's side, he watches a lot of women's tennis. He knows the women's side just as well as he knows the men's side. And that is great, because there's not many people who could say that. So I think because he's done it consistently, he's got a lot of support and a lot of respect from the women players, and from the media and from the public as well. So it's great, and long may it continue.
Excellent. And you've obviously done a huge amount to take tennis to a wider audience. You've mentioned She Rallies and Miss Hits and Tennis on the Road, and obviously the Judy Murray Foundation too. So where are those initiatives now? How are things progressing?
Well, Miss Hits, I started off in order to get more little girls coming into tennis. So creating a girl-friendly environment, so activities or an environment that was just for girls. So it's all the skill-building activities that you would typically find in starter programs, but we've plotted around it girly things like music and dance and cuddly toys, cartoon characters and so forth, because we wanted it to be something that they could really engage with and develop this, created a friendship group, develop the skills that you need to be able to play tennis and learn a bit about tennis through the cartoon characters who all kind of represented a tennis shot, Bella backhand, Valentina volley, etc., etc. And that's a great wee programme. And last year, FIFA and English cricket both told me that that programme had inspired what they were doing with girls. And I was like so thrilled to bits because I created that about 6 years ago. I mean, lots of the things that I've done, I've been ahead of my time. I think, but and I thought I was so happy to hear them saying that. So it did everything that I wanted it to do. And yeah, She Rallies was a program I created for the LTA, which was all about building a bigger female workforce, bigger and stronger female workforce. And it involves, we've got 52 ambassadors now. We started with 26. And they go out into their own backyards and they create female activator groups around them to help them grow the game and build their own businesses. But it's a kind of a mentoring training type of program. It's quite a simple concept, but it's worked really well. So it's women for women. And the foundation just operates in Scotland, and it takes tennis into rural and deprived areas. And that's a big thing for me, is opening tennis up in my country to people and places that wouldn't normally have the chance to try it. So I've got a team of 11 ambassadors, part-time ambassadors and a part-time project manager. I've got a CEO now. So we're growing. I don't want to be too big. I want to be good at what we do, but I want to do it well. But this is all about, it's equal opportunity again. It's I've always hated tennis as kind of elitist tag. And so we actually get off our butts and we go into areas that wouldn't normally see tennis, or sometimes we don't even have tennis courts, but we show them how to play starter tennis in whatever space they've got available. So barrier tapes and chairs, chalk lines, whatever it is. But we've built a massive army of people across the country who can deliver in their own backyard. So it's all about investing in local people. So I mean, I've done a lot with that in lockdown because we had videoed all of our content. So we just turned it into online workshops, and it's increased our reach significantly. Because, the LTA furloughed most of their staff, so they were unable to deliver anything during lockdown. Tennis Scotland don't do anything like that anyway. So we were actually able to make a whole lot happen for teachers, students, parents, the whole family tennis concept, things you could do at home. It was absolutely brilliant. So I get a lot of satisfaction and enjoyment from my foundation.
Excellent. That's fantastic to hear. And just finally, I was reading your autobiography. There seem to be many points during your career where other women have encouraged you to kind of believe in yourself and step forward. You talked about being brave. So what advice would you give to younger women who are perhaps progressing or wanting to progress in the sports sector today?
One of the best pieces of advice that I could give is to try to find somebody to work alongside or to mentor you, because the quickest and easiest way to get good at something is to work alongside somebody who's already done it before. And it doesn't matter what sport you're working in, what bit of sport you want to do, how much you want to do, there will be somebody in your community or in your local area who has done that before and can pass on that experience, even if they're just a voice at the end of the phone or on a Zoom call. And I think that's what would have made the biggest difference to me when I was starting out, was to have had somebody that I could actually see how they did it, somebody who I could pick up the phone to. So if you can find somebody, another female preferably, if you can, just because they see the world with the same eyes and hear it with the same ears as us. But you'll find a lot of good guys out there as well. That would be my number one piece of advice, is find somebody who is excellent at what they do within your area. But there's somebody that's the voice for you, or that puts an arm around you and encourages you and so forth, because it's very tough plowing your own furrow.
Thanks to Judy for sharing so much about her life and all she's doing for women and girls in tennis. If you're enjoying the Game Changers, it would be great if you could take a moment to review and rate the podcast. These ratings do make a huge difference to how the podcast is ranked and how likely it is that other people will find them. Please spread the word to your friends and family too. Another big thank you to Sport England for their kind support of this series, which enables us to share the stories of these amazing women with audiences all over the world. And many thanks to Sam Walker from What Goes On Media, who is a very talented executive producer for the Game Changers podcasts. You can find out more about all 41 of my incredible guests from this and the previous series at fearlesswomen.co.uk, or come and find us on social media at Sue Anstiss or at The Game Changers on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. My guest next week is Dame Jessica Ennis-Hill, Olympic champion and 3 times world champion heptathlete. It's a fabulous conversation, so please subscribe now and you won't miss it.
I look back now and I think, gosh, what an opportunity, what an amazing, unique position I was in. It was a lot of pressure and it was very stressful, but an incredible opportunity, and to be able to deliver the way I did and have those great memories, I couldn't have asked for more, really.
The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.